Welcome to another episode of SENSimilla. My guest today barely needs an introduction. Writer, journalist, author. Those are probably all synonyms that mean the same thing. I don't know, but he definitely will. He is the former cultivation editor at High Times. He is the author of Cannabis, a beginner's guide to growing marijuana, and he's the founder and editor-in-chief of Northeast Leaf, a new magazine devoted to cannabis cultivation, business, and culture. Danko, thank you so much for making time for us today. I really appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
As I was saying, kind of before we started, or just earlier in our conversation, the goal of this podcast is really like demystifying a lot of the cannabis industry. I know that you have your opinions on the cannabis industry, but really what we're talking about is like entrepreneurialism, getting into the game, and really like figuring out where people fit into this thing, or looking at the stories of people like you who have been in it and have made moves, who have like inserted themselves in a lot of ways into this community, which is how you do it anywhere on, as an entrepreneur. So that's kind of like what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. But before we get into the thick of that, and again, I said you barely need an introduction, and I don't want you to give it to yourself, but can you tell my guests a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Just from a young age, I've always been very interested in cannabis, smoking it and selling it pretty much was a thing growing up. And then
Yes.
I discovered that you could actually grow it, rather than relying on exports from Mexico or Jamaica or elsewhere. You could actually produce it in a very small space. And that was a really big revelation for me. And I took it from there, basically moved from Boston to New York City after graduating from Boston University, and got a job at a hemp company called Headcase. We made hemp clothing, baseball hats and t-shirts. That would have been around 97 or so. And then got to know some of the people at High Times through that job. There was not much of a cannabis industry at that time. We were
Right.
just we were two companies on the East Coast that were in, a similar, I would say, cannabis, hemp, sativa, all that stuff. And got to know the people at High Times. And when in early 2000s, I took a job there, basically just answering the phone, breaking down boxes, dealing with shipping products, and
Doing everything.
letting people in the front door and that sort of thing. Reader before I started working there, and just felt like they were, it was the only kind of job I would really want to have. It was teaching people about cannabis, and it really it became a lifestyle for me. I started working there in 2002 full time, and then started doing cultivation writing around 2004, 2005, and just took it from there. I started picking the top 10 strains of the year, and I introduced the High Times Seed Bank Hall of Fame to give people an idea of who the more reputable seed banks were. Ended up writing a book in 2011 called The Official High Times Field Guide to Marijuana Strains.
Do you have it?
I do.
Wow.
Of course. That it's a little bit dated at this point. Obviously, it's 10 years old. So a lot of the strains were kind of looking back to some of the building blocks of today's genetics in a lot of ways. I'd love to revamp that at some
Time for a follow-up.
point. Yeah. And then can you hear me?
I'm back. We're back. We'll get through this, Danny. And we're back. So, Danny, before our Wi-Fi cut out, we were talking a little bit about your entry into working with High Times, and you were saying basically you were letting people in the door, you were sweeping floors, you were writing, you were doing a little bit of everything. There's that, like, I don't know if Mark Twain said it or whatever, but that adage about if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, or whatever that is. Now, as an employee, did you kind of feel that way? Did you feel like there was a future? I mean, there obviously was. Did you think you had the foresight to kind of see that, or were you just ready to like get in no matter how you could?
I just really wanted to be a part of it. I felt like, this was a mission, really, and they were going over to Amsterdam, for the cannabis cups and things like that.
Yeah.
To me, it was a dream come true to get paid to do something like that and travel around visiting, people and smoking their weed and hash. So,
Yeah, I bet.
it was a dream come
What a
true
good
for me.
perk.
I remember waking up and being so happy to go in to work, because I was working with people that were family, and, we would go out on our balcony and smoke up and come up with great ideas. And it was really, and, people would stop by and visit. Snoop Dogg would come by, or Be Real.
Crazy.
It was just,
I was just gonna say,
also tons of activists. And anytime they were in New York, they would make a point of coming to High Times. A lot of times it'd be their first stop.
Cypress Hill was like, they had keys, right? They just walked right in. I was thinking,
Yeah.
there's like prior to, like, when I was preparing for this interview, I was thinking about, you're a human, so I imagine you used to watch The Simpsons. Maybe you still do, but there's this episode of The Simpsons where the family goes to New York City, right? And everybody goes off on their own adventure, and Bart winds up at the Mad Magazine headquarters. Do you know this episode?
Of course. Because I can relate to it.
Yeah, totally. So I was thinking about that. I was like, that's, like, he walks upstairs, and for anybody who hasn't seen this episode, Bart's wandering around New York City, and he comes across Mad Magazine, which is, I don't even know if it's still a thing anymore, but it's like a irreverent comic that, started in the 60s or whatever. I grew up reading it. It was great. But it's his Shangri-La, basically. And he's like, oh my God, I found it. And he walks in, and of course it's just like a boring waiting room with a woman, a secretary behind the desk or whatever. And then he leaves, and he opens the door, and the circus is going on behind him. Like, the entire madness is happening. And he's like, I'm never going to wash these eyes again. He says something along those lines. I imagine that's what you're saying, right? Snoop Dogg would come over, all the, Jack Herrera, seeing him in the office, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And that, that was on a day-to-day basis, really. But the truth is, every month a magazine had to come out. And so, in between those moments where you'd be talking to a Jack or a Lester Grinspoon, you would also have to get the work done. I mean, that's the thing. People are like, I want a job where I smoke weed all day. That's all well and good, but you have to get that's the bottom line. You don't get to have all the fun if the work's not done. And so all our sessions were brainstorming sessions. So even if we were, even if it was Space Cake Friday, for instance, we still, no matter how high you are, there's a magazine to put out, there are books to publish, there's calendars, there's a website, there's events to plan, there's always something to do. So the idea that all we did was sit around getting high,
but there's also journalistic integrity, and there's, like, being able to be a good writer, like all these things you have to do while, living in the dream.
Yeah. I mean, and, coming from the background of cannabis grower, I didn't really need a job. I mean, for me, the job was kind of a cover job to be able to tell my girlfriend's parents what I do for a living.
Sure.
So
let's talk about that. So
I didn't have to take a job. The point is that
you learned how to grow.
A job that I right. And so this was a job that I wanted, and so that made it all the more enjoyable, and to get paid for it and to be able to travel for free was all the perks and highlights of it. I remember Rob Thomas stopping by and saying, man, if I wasn't
Matchbox 20.
Yeah. He said, if I wasn't who I am, I'd want to be who you are. He was telling me things like that. Yeah. It was pretty amazing to hear that from someone like that, where they're jealous of you because you get to hang out and smoke and chill. And at the time, there were very few legitimate businesses in cannabis. I mean, we're talking about,
I was going to say, you guys had market share and legitimacy, right? Like there was maybe a couple small, I don't even know if that's true. I mean, I'm sure there were other magazines. I never heard of any. I still do read High Times, but in the 90s, I for sure read High Times, and I can't remember looking at the rack and saying, oh, maybe I'll get this competitor. You guys had the platform. It was you had the monopoly.
Yeah. I mean, also it was, the subject matter was completely taboo and illegal. And so we were taking risks. I can remember some mornings coming in and finding out, hey, all our advertisers just got raided, whether it was Operation Green Merchant or Operation Pipe Dreams. Every decade or so, the feds would come after us, or not necessarily even us, but our advertisers, and they would try to take us down. We were protected by the First Amendment, but that doesn't mean that they can't flip through the book and see, hey, here's a bunch of people that are, making money in the gray market or whatever you want to call it, and here's their phone numbers and addresses listed in out. So there were dangers to it, and there was risks taken. I mean, that's got to be understood as well. We knew we were taking a huge risk, but we also knew we were on the right side of history, and that part of it really resonated with me. The fact that, hey, we'll take our lumps here and there from the feds, but at the end of the day, we're right and they're wrong. We're having fun. Our parties are a lot more fun than theirs are, and we're changing the world for the better. Honestly, I believe cannabis is a healing medicine, and I think spreading the word and sharing the information is our duty, and it's a political act. And every seed that you plant is a hole in the wall of prohibition. And so there was a mission behind it. All the fun that we had and all the magazines and everything behind that was a mission.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, like that mission, which I think has been clear since, that magazine started, was to remove stigma in a lot of ways. It's something that, you and I share, or, in CannaPlanners, it was for sure something that High Times inspired in me early on, which is, you can look, there's a magazine up on the shelves. Like you can buy this magazine. You can read about, pop culture and cultivation and all these things that you're interested in, despite them being completely illegal at the time, federally still, obviously. But it was good to have High Times as like the pioneer in letting people feel like it was okay. It was in the Berlin Wall of normalization. I think you guys took quite a few bricks down for us, for sure. That's an important part of CannaPlanners, is through design, through language, especially, language, and visual conveyance, through just, for us, it's design and beautiful things, we hope, but it's what we do to push normalization. But again, it was High Times who really led the way. I'm curious, like, who were your early, well, I want to go back to the cultivation part, because that's really like, that's your thing. That's what even got you into High Times, like that's, where did that aside from being a lover of, here goes my internet now, but aside from being a lover of cannabis, as a user of cannabis, where'd the green thumb come from? I've been smoking cannabis my whole life. I kill plants, which we're going to talk about too. At the end of this, you're going to give me some tips.
Yeah, well, for me, there's kind of the trifecta of Ed Rosenthal, Kyle Cushman, and Jorge Cervantes. They were the three big mentors for me. Of course, I read a lot of other authors, Mel Frank, Rob Connell Clark, even Mountain Girl, who was married to Jerry Garcia. She wrote a book back in the 70s about growing cannabis. And so I just tried to absorb as much of that information as I could from whoever I could. And then once I got to start traveling around and going to Northern California and Vancouver and Spain and Amsterdam and visiting the people who were breeding the seeds and creating the strains, I just absorbed all that information as much as I could and tried to convey it back to people. I think that's really my lane. I mean, you talk about the wall and tearing it down. Some people are, giving people the news. Some people are helping them build businesses. For me, it's about cultivation. The more you grow, it's about overgrowing the government, really, just creating so much cannabis that it's overwhelming. And that's why I named my first podcast Free Weed, is because to me, the idea of a $400 ounce is just ridiculous. It doesn't cost anything to produce cannabis, barely. So the cost was always in the risk. And now that the risks are lessening, or in some places there's really no risk if you're allowed to grow 4 or 6 plants or whatever. I think the cost should be almost free. I mean, it should be the cost of production plus whatever you want to tack onto it, but it certainly should not have all that risk-based cost in it. So for me, the mission has always been just to teach people more cultivation, and I honor the people who I learned it from. As I just mentioned, all those guys and more. I mean, Greg Green. There were people at other magazines, Cannabis Culture magazine, Skunk magazine. I was reading everything from everybody because I just wanted to
Skunk
know.
magazine.
Yeah, they were around. There
Forgot
was a
about that
magazine
one.
called Heads. There was SENSimilla Tips back in the 80s. There has been a ton out there and a ton of books. And for me, pre-internet, that was really the only way to absorb that information, was to read it or to talk to people in person. And so I just paid attention and tried to regurgitate as much of it back to people as possible. And I just think everybody kind of has their lane. I think people need to understand that in this industry as well. Even now, some people are cultivators, some people are business builders, some people spread the word and the news and the gospel and the activism. There's lots of different places for people in the industry, but you kind of have to find your niche.
Definitely. Let me ask you this. So, like, when you started growing cannabis, when you started working at High Times, when you started getting involved, as you alluded to, they were pretty scary times. It was right, the war on drugs was raging. I guess it still is, but it was the Just Say No campaign was huge. Dare, everybody was in Dare in the 90s. I was, all these things. So there's this thing that I often ask guests, and something that I often think about, which is the without a net, the fear, right? Like that scary feeling of like taking a risk, right? And especially for entrepreneurs, like leaving the complacency of your 9 to 5 job or coming out of the cannabis closet and uh giving yourself that identity of the cannabis grower. That's scary. Couple that with like the entrepreneurial fear of, so you've got the legal repercussions of being public. You've also got that like entrepreneurial fear of like, am I good enough? Like, am I the right guy for the job? Like all of that. Does that resonate with you? Did you feel that like when the first time you introduced yourself to the High Times guys? Was that like, was that a relief to you? Do you feel like you were, relieved of some stress off your shoulders?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, back then, jail was a real possibility.
Yeah.
Raids were happening. In my wallet, I always kept my lawyer's phone number and that sort of thing. So even knowing we were protected by the First Amendment, using your name in the magazine, you took huge risks.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, it also is liberating because I always said, do your worst. Throw the book at me. What are you going to do? I have a quarter of an ounce on me. I never was in a position, hopefully. I mean, obviously that's not true, but the idea was, you take the risks, but there's tremendous rewards as well. I mean, not just financial, but in the feeling of being able to spread the word about something you truly believe in. So it was well worth it for me, even though I lived through some harrowing times and some raids. I mean, I had friends locked up. I had friends who were killed, and so there. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I guess looking
I
back,
totally agree with
and it
you.
was liberating. I mean, even
Yeah.
just being out and open as an activist, going to the Boston Freedom Rally, going to the Million Marijuana March, Arbor, going to those events and finding out that they're from all walks of life, all ages, all races, genders. It's so heartening, and it really just reinforced for me the idea that we were on the right side, and that eventually we would get to a place where all the injustice, and I think we're getting there. We're not there yet, obviously, but we're moving towards that. We're expunging people's criminal records. We're getting people out of jail for nonviolent cannabis offenses. To me, that's number one. We're creating places where people can use cannabis socially, although obviously in the last year that's gone a little bit by the wayside. But we're also, maintaining home grow, which I think is important too. I think we should have all the options in the world for where we get our cannabis from, including our own gardens or farmers markets and co-ops and things, or dispensaries. Everybody has a place in this industry and in this community. And I just, like I said, it's all worth it in the end. And we do it in honor of the people that we lost along the way as well. Jack Herrer and Dennis Perone and Dr. Todd McCorea, Brownie Mary, all these amazing luminaries, Dr. Lester Grinspoon up in New England. These are the people who fought before us, and there's going to be people after us that continue the fight. And it's not about any particular individual. It's about the plant. And if you do right by the plant will do right by you. That's kind of a mantra for me. Give back to the plant what it gives you, and you'll always be safe and sound in the industry.
I totally agree with you. Wow, it's really interesting to hear you say that. That was awesome. I
appreciate it. It's just
yeah,
the true believers, right? So if you're getting in the industry just to make a quick buck, you're probably not going to have that happen. Maybe so, but maybe not. But if you're a true believer and you're in it for the long haul, you'll eventually find your lane. And I think, no matter what, you'll be doing the right thing, and you'll sleep better at night and feel good about yourself. And that's ultimately way more important to me than financial success or anything else.
We definitely field a couple sales calls. They're not too often, enough that they, we can check them off, maybe one or two a month, where a person will call us and want to talk to us about what we do, and will ask us what the return is going to be. How soon can we expect a return on what you're going to do? And that phone call ends pretty quickly after that, because of exactly what you're saying. Like, first of all, like, I don't have a crystal ball, so I have no idea. Second of all, if that, for us, because it's, we share a lot of the same values that you just went through, but it really is much bigger than the monetary value. There is a responsibility, a big responsibility. I think that cannabis companies, people who are trying to do this legitimately and with meaningful intent, which is really important. There is an illusion of crazy success and bags of money, and it's not there yet. We're not there yet. It's maybe someday, but it's not it's not what's important. I mean, at all. What's really important is, as you said, like, furthering the work of the people who came before us, and continuing to help people get out of jail, help people figure out how to cope with the repercussions of the war on drugs, how to change the way people kind of think about that. Um, yeah, I love when those people call, because I'm like, best of luck, good luck,
Yeah, I mean, I get people trying to pick my brain all the time, and they're like, how do I get in the industry? And I tell them, I'm trying to teach you how to get out of the industry.
Yeah.
I'm all about growing your own. So getting in the industry at this point, you really have to find your place, and that's not easy, because so many people are now getting in the industry and there's a lot of money pouring in. But as you mentioned, not everybody's making money, and that's the big illusion here. It's like, I can count, I think for every company that's making money, there's dozens that are either losing money or barely staying afloat, or just waiting for the next step, whether it be federal legalization or legalization, let's say in New York or New Jersey or something, whatever it is, they're
perpetually waiting.
Right. But they're planting a flag somewhere, but then they're kind of just waiting for the tide to change for them to actually profit. So
Yep.
that's tough as well. You have to be willing to spend money and lose money in order to then
Lose money.
emerge, eventually,
A lot of losing money. Yeah, I mean, I've heard you talk about this before about kind of getting out of the industry, and I think like I'm with you. Like while I'm helping companies build, while I'm helping people build companies, they're self-sufficient, right? So like the industry, quote unquote, like people who I feel like who are asking you how to get into the industry, and like people who usually ask me the same question, they're like, who can give me a job, in the grow house? Or do you know anybody who's hiring a bud tender? And it's less about, to me, like that's, I have no idea what to tell them. Go get it, go get it, go to the careers page of a company you like. I have no idea. But the thing I am interested in, and this is kind of the next chapter I hope we can get into right now, is positioning yourself in the industry, in a way that's self-sufficient, right? So not your 9 to 5, not relying on a boss, but rather creating your own lane, doing the thing you do, which is exactly what you've done. So talk to me about kind of, so you left High Times fairly recently, at the beginning of COVID, as a result of COVID, supposedly. That's what I read.
Partly, I
If you,
mean, they
if you
moved
care to
to
comment, you
California.
can.
Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, they in the last couple of years they went through an ownership change, and the new ownership is in Los Angeles. They wanted to move the company for a long time, last couple of years, and eventually moved there. I'm a New Yorker. I'm here in the city, and I eventually just
It just didn't work.
yeah, it didn't work out because they were really based out there at this point, and they're
And it seems
focused.
like they're evolving too. They're evolving
They're going
into
in a
a
different
brand line.
direction,
Yeah.
right? They're focusing on going public and purchasing dispensaries and really going in that direction. And I want to work in media. I want to work in print magazines. I want to educate people. I don't necessarily want to sell them weed. So
Yeah, totally.
I'm now with Northeast Leaf magazine. It's
Well,
part
let's
of
talk about this. Hold on.
yeah.
Let's talk about this. So the specifics of your exit are not really important. What I want to
Right.
know about is
We could just say that we parted ways.
yeah, no, that's fine. What I'm interested in is those few days prior and few days following, right? So, and I'm gonna contextualize this, right? So when I first started this company, when I first started CannaPlanners, I had a job and I was working 9 to 5, and I felt that that was a good balance. That's what a lot of entrepreneurs do, right? They have their side hustle, which maybe someday will overtake what pays the bills, and they can transition into that. And the hope is that you're always in, you can juggle it and you're always in control, right? Towards the end of my career, I had this anxiety that the inevitable was coming. I felt like I was no longer in control of my exit, and it turned out I was right, and I was asked to leave. Right. So I again, and we're talking about this entrepreneurial fear, this like jumping in without a net, so sort of thing. So to put it into perspective for me, or as to rephrase my question, putting it back on myself is, did you know this was coming? Were you already sort of formulating Northeast Leaf Mag? And as you were like, thrown into the wilderness, were you scared? Were you confident? Was it all of it?
Wow. I haven't really
Is that
talked about
loaded?
this.
Is
Yeah,
that
no, I
loaded?
mean, no, not at all. I mean, the
Mhm.
truth is, yes, I could see it coming for a couple of years, to be honest. The last couple of years uh, were a very transitional time. The ownership changed. I was there 17 years prior to that. And, you can adjust to new ownership and they can adjust to you. But like I said, they had a different direction that they wanted to go in, and I could sense that. And so at the same time, you don't want to give up your salary, you don't want to give up your health insurance,
Yeah.
and you don't want to give up the steadiness and
Yeah.
especially for me, like I said, it was my dream job. It was iconic to me. It was the only job I ever wanted. It was a place that I wanted to retire, and I didn't see anything else really. It's like when I started, there were no other like we mentioned, there wasn't no cannabis industry. And by the time it came to a close with High Times, there was a huge cannabis industry. So there was, when that time came, and like I said, I could see it coming. There was salary reductions. There was
They
reductions
did.
in the amount of responsibility and that sort of thing. We were moving offices. This office kept getting smaller and smaller until it was basically like a shared co-working space.
That's
And
where you
so,
and I first met, at that shared working space when I was
yeah,
meeting with David. Yep.
that's right. So you could see the writing on the wall. And, I was hoping that I was still going to be a part of the future, and then COVID hit, and then it was like you got hit by the wall.
So was
And
Northeast Leaf Mag in your brain during this time?
not at the time. I mean,
Oh,
no, because
wow.
I really didn't. I mean, I certainly was envisioning a life after High Times in my mind, but the reality of it really didn't
You
hit
mean as
until
you saw the writing on the wall, you knew that you saw the writing on the wall?
right. I mean, you could see it from a mile away in some ways, and then it happens, and you're just. I spent a week or two just moping and wondering what I'm going to
Yeah.
do, and very, very worried and stressed. And everybody was telling me, you're going to be fine, you're going to be great. There was a sense of relief for sure, because the last couple of years were not nearly as fun or pleasant as the first, let's say, 15 or 16 years, which were
Yeah.
just blessed. I mean, I can't even tell you how amazing those first decade and a half at High Times was just incredible for me. I mean, it was everything.
Yeah, man, you're
Aside
Lester Bangs. You were there. You were like at
as,
it, dude.
aside from my family life, it's the most precious moments of my life were then. But like I said, the last couple of years started to go way downhill. I was not happy at all. I was definitely depressed, basically, by
Yeah.
the changes and by the diminishing uh, responsibilities and things like that. So it did come as a relief in the end, but it also came as a huge shock. And everyone's telling me, you're going to be great, you're going to bounce back, you're going to be fine. Everybody loves you, and you're hearing all of this. But the reality is, I need health insurance. I need
Yeah.
a salary, and I need to do something. I need So I started up the podcast first, and I started doing it as free weed. That I ran into trouble with High Times with that, so I changed the name to Grow Bud Yourself. And that's been the podcast. We're on our 40th episode right now. It's totally independent. It's just me and my co-host, Mike G. We own it 50-50. And we have a Patreon page, and we put the magazine out. We try to sell ads. And that's, how we envisioned pulling out of this thing. And then the opportunity arose with Northeast Leaf. It was an existing company for 10 years. They've been doing Northwest Leaf in Seattle, in Washington, and they have Oregon Leaf
Oh,
and Alaska Leaf. They have Maryland Leaf. They recently opened California Leaf. So this is a company that's expanding. They're doing print magazines. I love that the print magazines are free to the
yeah.
public, which is just amazing,
They're
because all
beautiful
the
too.
yeah, I mean,
Hold
all
that
the
back up. Go ahead. You can hold it back up
that's
again.
our
Hold it up.
first issue.
It is beautiful. Yeah.
That's our first issue. I'm so
It's
proud of this magazine.
it's great.
And it's for the 8 states of the Northeast, where, like I said, I'm from Boston. I grew up there. I live in New York. So, I'm a big Northeast guy. So for me to come back to my origins here is amazing. For it to be a free magazine is amazing. The people that I work with are not, Wall Street types. They're not corporate. They're like us, they're
Yeah,
exactly like
yeah,
us. And
yeah.
and so it's been just a huge pleasure, and being part of this Leaf Nation project, which is expanding. I mean, it's incredible that we're in the midst of this pandemic, and they're expanding into the Northeast. We're building a new website. We have events called Leaf Bowls that we can't wait to bring back once we can have events again. Excuse me.
What was a leaf bowl? I can imagine.
It's
I can imagine.
it's
Is it
it's the
exactly what I think?
Yeah, it's their version of the cannabis cup, but with the Leaf Nation twist on it. So it's just been such a pleasure to be back in print, and doing the podcast and working with people that are true believers, that really want to spread the word about cannabis. and that really it's not just about the industry, it's about the community, it's about equity and social issues. It's about everything about this plant, the healing energy of it, the incredible spirit of the people who have been fighting for it all these years. So it's been a pleasure. I got reunited with tons of old High Times colleagues as well to do it. So we have 4 former
The
High
band's
Times
back together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what another thing is they allowed me to sort of pick and choose a team to put out this magazine. So I picked, my ad person, Mike Chahoniak, from he was at High Times before I was. He was at Headcase with me at the hemp company back in the 90s. And
He's a
my
guy.
co-host, my co-host of the show, Mike G, is a co-editor of the magazine with me. Pete Thompson, who was a web guy for High Times, is our web guy for Leaf magazines. Bobby Black, who worked with me for many, many years. And he started at High Times as an intern at 19 years old, which I can't imagine. I was in my 20s, but
he's
when
a
I
lifer.
started, yeah, oh yeah. And he's part of California Leaf, and he writes a column for our national content as well. So it's been great to reunite with colleagues of the past and be able to do something like this. I haven't felt like this for about 3 years or so, where there's been this type of enthusiasm to put out content, to talk to advertisers, to talk to contributors, and to do a podcast and all of it, and just have people on board that are amazing people. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of it. I mean, it's a rebirth for me. So I really I love it. It's been amazing.
Well, I mean, that right there is the important kind of footnote of the whole thing, right? Like, so I was asking you about this anxiety pre and post, life at High Times and moving into all these new things, and I can as I alluded to, I can completely relate to that. I imagine people listening to this can completely relate to that. There is a sense of, for me, I'll use words that relate to me, right? There was a sense of dread. There was a weight. I knew it was coming, or in my case, I actually didn't really know it was coming, but I thought I had control. And then afterwards, similarly to you, there was a what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Sort of thing, right? Like a little bit of panic. You go through the stages of grief really quickly, right? And I think hearing you say that now you've come back around and you're, there's fulfillment. I mean, you're smiling as you're talking about it. There's a clear happiness in your life now that it sounds to me like you weren't really experiencing at the last little bit of High Times. That feeling alone,
Absolutely.
my point is like that feeling alone, like it is possible. Like for people who are thinking about like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, like you'll figure it out. And I know that's such a cop out of a thing to say, but it's true. If you're, if you can hustle and really figure it out, but
It
it's all
really
about that joy.
it felt like jumping off a cliff
Yeah.
and landing in cool, wonderful water. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's scary and it's frightful and you dread the feeling and everything. But then once you do it, you realize there's other things out here, and they might even be better than the things of the past. And you can always create something that I think growing cannabis helped me with that as well, because you can have a couple of bad harvests and really be in the doldrums, but one good pull, a good 3 or 4 months, and you're back in the game, and
You're back at it.
yeah. And
Let me ask you this in relation to that. So like at the heart of it, I'm a sales guy, right? So I started this company and I'm a sales guy. So I can clearly remember closing a deal. This is maybe 2 weeks after I was fired, or a week, or it was soon after I was fired. And I remember sitting in my car in a parking lot, and I had just closed the first deal for CannaPlanners. And I don't want to say I was like brought to tears, but it was pretty close. What was it for you? Was it like a subscribe? Was it the first ad that got like when did you know, like, okay, at least like I'm gonna be cool. I'm cool. Like, what do you know what it was?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was, you know, hearing back from my colleagues at the Leaf Nation, my uh, partners basically now, but at the time, people that I'm kind of pitching this idea to, and they're pitching me, I'm pitching them, but who knows what's going to come of it. There was a few possibilities at the time, so it wasn't necessarily that I had everything invested in this one opportunity, but hearing back from them after writing them my proposal of, here's what I need to do this, and hearing back like, let's do it. Let's pull the trigger. And this is, I mean, in the midst of COVID. I mean, this was like,
Yeah.
I want to say it was
No one's taking risks.
April or May of 2020. So, I mean, this was here in New York, things were very, very dire and bad at that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still not great, obviously, but this was the thick of it.
The streets were empty then. The
Oh
streets
my
were
God,
literally
all
empty
you
then.
could hear was ambulance. Taping my podcast, it's like all you can hear is ambulances in the background.
Mhm.
So it was rough. And to hear that from them, I mean, I'm not going to deny it. I did cry tears of joy at
Yeah.
that. And it was such a relief and such a feeling of joy, because it's something I really wanted, but I didn't know for sure if it was going to happen or not. And I certainly wouldn't have faulted them for wanting to wait a little bit. But, the fact that they were so gung-ho, and that, it was just, it felt so amazing. I'm feeling emotional right now just thinking
I
about it.
get it, dude. Well, that's why I
And
asked.
you know what else? The day that the first issue arrived at my house,
And you held
and
it.
I ripped open the box and I held it, and
Yeah.
I
know what you did. You like literally held it. It was like, oh my God.
Yeah, I felt reborn, to be honest, in that moment. I really felt like I had a new mission, and I had
That's the light.
and I
That's the
had the
light
wind
right there.
behind me on it too. Like the podcast was chugging along, but it's not something I can live off of. But this is something real. And when I felt it in my hands, and I realized that here it is, and this is just the first month's issue, and we're gonna do them. Now we're on our 6th month of issues, and the response has been incredible. The advertising has been coming in. The contributors, everyone who reads it loves it. So and it's so big.
Yeah.
Like I just couldn't believe how big it is too. Like, I mean, it just felt so amazing. And being in print for so
Is it
long, even
old Rolling
pre-internet,
Stone size? Is it like the old Rolling Stone size, or is it?
it's up there. It's up
Yeah.
there. I don't know if it's that big. I mean, we're still at 48 pages too, so we need to build on that. But it just having come from print and remembering that the first time I saw my name in High Times, it brought back that type of emotion in me, and that feeling and joy. And yeah, cannabis brought me here.
Yeah, totally.
That's the other thing.
It's a beautiful thing, man. That's beautiful to hear. It really is. And I'm always curious about that because, obviously I'm in my bubble. I have my experiences. But it's really good to demystify a lot of this and let people know that, hey, we're humans, and there's things that are in your life that are stressful, but if you have goals and you can you can get there, that feeling afterwards, it will, as you have just heard, will literally bring you to tears. It's a feeling of self-worth and validation, and all of these things that right before it happens, like, aren't even in my being at all. Like, there's no chance of those things happening, but when they do, it's like, oh my God, there's buy-in, and I I can pay a bill, right? I can pay a bill. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
hallelujah.
we're all going through a lot of trauma. I mean, that's, I think, one of the reasons cannabis was deemed so essential, is that it's helping us treat this trauma. And aside from my family, what's been keeping me going is the weekly deadline of the podcast and the monthly deadline of the magazine. And like I said before, even with High Times, there's always that deadline, and there's always work to be done. You can consume cannabis, but you can't let cannabis give you an excuse to be lazy.
No,
People say cannabis makes you lazy. I don't understand that. I mean,
not me.
lazy people, there's certainly lazy people who smoke cannabis and allow it to be an excuse for them. That happens all the time. But is it the cannabis or is it the person? Because most
That's
of
a
the
person
cannabis,
for sure.
the cannabis users I know are productive, are caring, loving, amazing people. And,
Same.
so
Yeah.
but again, that deadline, having that weekly deadline and that monthly deadline has given me purpose, and having cannabis behind that purpose gives me even more purpose. And so it's my
It's a
pleasure.
beautiful thing, Danny. It really is a beautiful thing. And as I said, like the magazine's gorgeous. So I'm super happy for you. I'm curious, aside from your, yeah, show us, is this the most recent issue? Is this
Harvest issue. No, most recent one I'm actually still waiting on, the February. But
January? You got
yeah,
January there?
I got yeah,
There you go. Gorgeous.
there's that one. That's the culture issue. And I love the
And don't worry,
themes.
we're gonna link it in the description here.
Oh, perfect.
We'll get people there. We'll do the
Awesome.
whole thing.
Yeah,
I'm
I love the
curious.
themes of the issues as well. It's great.
Well, let's talk about the magazine a little bit. So, what aside from cultivation, or including cultivation, like what's the kind of through line of the magazine?
Well, the magazine is really for the industry and the community of the Northeast. So, we do dispensary reviews. We have bud tender of the month and strain and concentrates of the month, where
Awesome.
these are products you can purchase in a dispensary. So obviously Maine and Massachusetts are our kind of bread and butter right now, because those are the places with the most dispensaries. But things are
Right.
changing so rapidly in the Northeast that pretty soon, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, these are states that are going to have, tons of dispensaries in the very near future. And so I think that's great. And we're covering that part of things. We're covering the science, the cultivation, but we also want to, we have patient profiles as well. We want to focus on the medicinal aspect. We want to focus on uh, cannabis as an alternative to alcohol and pharmaceutical drugs and hard drugs, and even things like nicotine and caffeine that are more harmful than cannabis and yet so prevalent. So we just want to help cannabis heal people and heal the planet. And so that's really our focus, is just to spread the word. And I think there's so many people that are curious about cannabis and that don't really know, should I get the low THC? Should I get the CBD? Should I do, what are concentrates? What's this edible going to do to me? There's a lot of canna curious people that are coming into the situation without a lot of information, or with information from the internet that could be spotty. So we want to educate them as to what's available legally in the marketplace for them and what options they have. And as things change, we want to just keep the emphasis on the consumer. And that's why the magazine's free. We charge our advertisers to reach people, but we want the people to just pick it up at their dispensary or smoke shop and flip through and hopefully learn something and see something they like and maybe try something new. But yeah, it's awesome. It's great to be back in my home area, and it's so much fun to visit. Go out to the Berkshires and visit some of these incredible dispensaries, even though now
Yeah.
everything's curbside delivery and that kind of thing. But you can see where things are going, and once we're out of all this COVID, I think where cannabis is going to be one of the things that's really survives and thrives beyond, into the future.
I hope so. It's certainly one of the perks I missed of working in a cannabis company, which is visiting clients, uh, doing all those fun things, farm tours and dispensary tours and grow room tours, like all that stuff, and the networking. You were, we've met in Vegas at various NECANs, like all these things. You were a constant presence at all these things. How, aside from creating content, now that COVID is kind of it has completely dismantled the in-person networking event space. What are you doing in place of that? I mean, again, aside from creating.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just preparing for the future. I think once everybody once the vaccinations get around, and already things are starting to seem like hopefully they're getting better. Been to a couple of events. I mean, bonfire up in Maine, an outdoor event, and that sort of thing. I think there's going to be a lot more outdoor kind of events, things like Turf Top Throwdown, where you're at a fairgrounds, and once the spring and summer comes, those are going to be events that are going to sustain us through the warmer time of year. And in general, I think there's a lot of online stuff happening. Obviously, things like Clubhouse and that kind of thing as well, where you can talk to
just
people.
got on. I feel like if ever there's a way to feel old, it's get a new social media app. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
There's a meme. I don't know if you've seen this meme of the guy trying to use Clubhouse, and it's just thousands of voices talking over each other. That's sort of been my experience so far.
Yeah, no, I mean, you got to pick and choose where you go in there, but
totally. It is a great thing though, by the way.
Yeah. And I think the social media stuff, the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn has been a positive for us. I think that's the way, and podcasting has been huge because people are home and they need things to listen to, things to watch. And I think if you're going to give them something where they can learn a little bit about the politics, a little bit about cultivation, that's very popular as well. So we have Leaf Life is the podcast that's part of Leaf Nation, which is my partners out in Seattle. That makes Northwest Leaf, and that I think we're just trying to expand into different regions. We're looking at all over the United States and overseas as well. I mean, we're looking to expand even in this time because we anticipate an end to where we're at right now, and we want to have a foothold like everybody else in the future. And I do think, as I mentioned, that cannabis is going to be a major, I mean, it already is, but it's going to be huge when all this is said and done. Just the fact that they deemed it essential, the fact that we're talking about national legalization or taking it off the schedule and that sort of thing. These are major steps that are going to be huge. And it's important for us as a community to keep in mind that, this multi-billion-dollar industry, it needs to remember its past and needs to know that there was a lot of communities that were just disproportionately affected by the war on this flower. And we need to recognize that and also, create these new systems and industries and laws with respect to that.
Absolutely. This is definitely a lesson, I've been able to learn from in the last year, just as kind of CannaPlanners is starting to see just, a moderate amount of success. We're finally able to, as I said, like we're like any of these companies looking to the future, but now that we're able to, now that we have clients and we're, doing okay, we can look to the past and figure out, how to rem in our own little way. But I think what you're saying is super important for anybody trying to get into this or even just be a part of it. It's imperative that you remember how you got there, and it's at the result of a amazing amount of suffering, really. So that's definitely important to remember. So going from a national, international magazine, traveling everywhere, experiencing cannabis from all over the place, seeing how, people in how different people are doing it. What makes the Northeast so special? I'm from here, so I know the answer to this question, right? I'm from Rhode Island, live in Vermont. I'm in it to win it. Why is the Northeast so awesome?
Oh man, let me count the ways. It's harder to do everything in the Northeast. I mean,
Yes.
Even our ancestors that came over had to pull all the rocks out of the dirt just to have a farm. And I think, people are just, when you've been through the winter in the Northeast and you've tried to deal with, growing cannabis in the fall and all of that, there's so many challenges to overcome. and you just gain a certain amount of, and strength. And some of the strains that have been developed in the Northeast. I mean, even as a youngster, I remember going up to Vermont, even in like the late 80s, early 90s, and picking up incredible cannabis that would rival anything from Northern Connecticut. And I think there's a ton of activism going on, obviously, as well, with things like Boston Freedom Rally and MassCan, and having so many universities really adds to that as well. I think that's one of the reasons Ann Arbor is such a special place in cannabis lore, is you get this infusion of young people every year that just come in fresh and new, and want to change the world, and they still believe they can. And
Yeah.
and ultimately they do. And that's the amazing thing, is some people, start to think, oh, you can't, and they get jaded. But the truth is, you can, and we did, and we will,
Yeah.
and we are. And that's
Well
a fact.
said.
I mean, I've seen it, obviously, in the last 25 years of being involved, so much change for the better. Still a long way to go, obviously, but I never could have imagined that we'd be where we are now back then. Even though that's what I wanted, I don't know that I truly believed that it could happen. And you have so many people in your ear telling you, what are you wasting your time for? It's never going to be legal. You're ruining your career. You'll never get a job after working at High Times or cannabis. And you hear that over and over. And after a while, you're like, wait, could they be right? And I'm really happy to say that they were not right. And
Yeah, the quote "they" are almost never right. It's funny,
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
important to
That's
not
one
listen
thing
to
I
those
would,
voices.
right. I mean, that's another thing. Good advice for people that want to be a part of things is, don't plan for the future you've been told is coming. Plan for the one you know or believe is coming. And that's even considering your business plan. Don't write your business plan envisioning a $400 ounce, because when that risk is gone, that ounce is going to be $100 or less.
Still
And
a commodity.
right, so
It'll get priced that way
but
someday.
adjust your business plan accordingly.
Yeah.
Because if you're planning on selling them for prohibition-based prices, you're going to fall by the wayside, and you're going to be a relic of the past, because competition comes in. The High Times learned this lesson the hard way too. New competition comes in, and if you're not on top of everything, you can lose market share real fast. Be the IBM instead of the Apple.
Totally. Try to have the foresight. Follow your gut. It's almost always right. Danny Danko, you are a cultivation expert. We have not talked about cultivation at all. I am what's the opposite of an expert? I am that with cultivation. I am a brown thumb, although that sounds gross. I'm not a green thumb. I kill plants. Vermont legalized cannabis recreationally, for adult use in 2018, 2017. I can't remember. And I couldn't wait to exercise my new civil right and put my 2 plants out in my yard. And even then I killed them. So I am the worst grower on the planet. Perhaps there's someone listening who is also equally bad at growing. Break it down for us as simple as possible. Okay. I am an idiot. How can I grow cannabis successfully in my house?
Wow.
And
Okay.
if you'd like, we'll if you have specific products, we'll
Shameless
put
plug.
them in. Start with this book. So read
Start
this.
with
I
the
was going to
book.
say, what book should we read?
Well, I purposely wrote the book for exactly that type of person, the beginner. I wanted to make sure, if your grandmother with glaucoma wants to grow her own, although grandmothers typically are really good.
Yeah, they can grow
gardeners.
it.
They're usually
Yeah,
pretty
they're
good
good.
gardeners.
They know what's up.
But I just mean for anybody. I mean, I really, it's big letters, illustrations,
There's pictures, guys. There's pictures.
Yeah, it's meant to be like almost like a kid's book. So, although it's not for children, but it really is the basics. So I start with just photosynthesis and how it works, the life cycle of a cannabis plant, what the vegetative stage, what the flowering stage is. And it really, it doesn't teach you everything you need to know, but it gets you started, gets you on the road, gives you a little bit of knowledge about all the different aspects. But of course, you're going to have to dig deeper. Another reason I wrote it is because when I started, everything was a textbook. I mean, the Jorge and Ed Rosenthal books I mentioned earlier, they were dense and thick with the knowledge and information, but also daunting and a little bit scary, like taking a college course or something. So this is like my 101, my book. So yeah, I mean, that's where I would start. But nothing beats experience. But yeah, all the books in the world don't beat experience. Actually, plant seeds. Don't start with really expensive seeds that you paid a lot of money for. Start with something cheap and figure it out, because trial and error is a major part of cannabis cultivation as well. With lots of error, you have to accept it. You have to understand that plants die, plants get diseases, plants get pests. Sometimes you don't know what the hell happened. Something they just keel over. So there's a lot of trial and error, but it's so much fun that I think, especially in the absence of that fear and the risk, if you're allowed to grow your 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 plants, just plant those seeds in the spring, do what you can to keep them happy, and hopefully you'll reap an amazing harvest in the fall. Sorry.
There are those. It's
siren.
okay. That's New York living, man. That's,
Right.
When I left New York City,
I tried not to have them on my podcast because people are driving in their cars and then they hear
there's no escaping it. When I moved out of New York, it took me a few weeks to figure out how to sleep, because I'd been so accustomed to like street noise and sirens, and the silence killed me.
Yeah, I'm a city guy too. I get weird in the country. It's too quiet.
It's too quiet. There's murderers out there somewhere. So put those seeds in the ground, give it some time.
Yeah, I mean, all the books in the world don't compare to the experience. Right, water, plant nutrients, light, air circulation. There's some things that are just basic. My best advice to people usually is don't put minor before major. So, make sure the plant's getting enough light and water before you start worrying about some fancy little gadget that tells you, something about the air or whatever it might be. It's easy to get bogged down in the minutia, but if you focus on the links of the chain, the main links, light, air, food, water, that sort of thing, and sometimes you just got to stay out of the way. Some people just meddle too much, and
I'm a meddler.
they think, oh, I'll give it more food, it'll grow bigger. Well, there's limiting returns there. So, it's all about patience too. That's really what I hear from most growers when I ask them for their best bit of advice. It's like, just be patient, diligent, check your plants every day. Don't let them go a few days without doing something, at least taking a look at them. And all the problems always start where you can't see them, underneath the leaves, at the surface of the soil, where the leaves meet the stems and things. So you really need to get a loupe or a magnifying glass and really get in there close. And it's fun too. I mean, it's a trip. It's like a nature special sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially when you release predator insects and you watch your spider mites. Ladybugs or any kind of predator insects. One of the coolest to watch is the praying mantis. Those are incredible.
They're savage.
Oh yeah.
They are savage.
Rip the heads off and suck all the juice out of it. It's quite satisfying when you don't.
Yeah, they're killing your plants.
These
you gotta rip those heads off. I get it. So you heard it here, folks. Patience, diligence. I think that's a beautiful period to put on this conversation. Important for growing your cannabis, important for growing your career and your entrepreneurial adventure. Like patience, diligence, you'll be successful. Danny, this is the part where you plug yourself. That sounds weird too.
I feel like I've been doing that the whole time. But okay.
You've held up everything. But tell the people where they can find you. We'll be sure to link most of it in the description below.
Yes, absolutely. The podcast you can find at growbudyourself.com or our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Danny Danko. I'm on Instagram as Danny Danko HT, Twitter and Facebook, just Danny Danko. Northeast Leaf Magazine, also on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And yeah, we're about to launch a new website, leafmagazines.com, but that hasn't quite launched yet. And yeah, that's pretty much it for plugs. The book is on Amazon, so you can buy it there. If you want signed copies, just contact me through the DMs or whatever, and I can sign a copy. You can Venmo me and I'll ship it to you direct. And just keep growing, keep it green. And yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Danny Danko. You've been an absolute pleasure to talk to. I appreciate you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me about your adventure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Will. And thank you, CannaPlanners. And keep up the great work. I appreciate it.
We'll end it right there. I will keep up the good work. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. We'll see you at the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.